Welcome back to Coding Hub, and today we are deep diving into the while loops. From the basic to advanced tricks, we are diving into user input validation, creating mind-blowing patterns, and crunching numbers with Fibonacci series and factorial calculations. Are you excited? Let's get started. Okay, so before jumping into the while loop, let us consider a very simple example. And the example is that your teacher has provided you a simple task, and the task is that you have to find out sum of n terms. And this n terms will begin from 0 and it will go till the nth term. Now, how you'll be doing it? So if it will be 1, 2, or 3 terms, it is very easy. You can simply say 1 plus 2 plus 3 or 0 plus 1 plus 2. But let us suppose this terms increases to 1000. Now it will be becoming too much complex as the number goes much higher. So here comes while loop as a savior. It is much more efficient. It will take much lesser line of code and it will be doing this simple thing without making you feel asleep. Okay, so let us jump into the while loop and do this simple thing. So for this, what we can do, let us suppose a variable n, and this variable defines our n terms. Now let us define our starting term, which will be 0, and then we can simply say while a is less than equals n. Now what it will be doing, it will be basically checking whether a is less than equals n. So this was our condition, right? So we will be incrementing a till it reaches n, right? So here the condition basically states this while, it will execute till this particular condition is true. And what is the condition? The condition is that this variable has to be less than equals to this variable, right? Now let us focus on the next thing. So we'll be requiring another variable, we can say s, where we'll be storing the sum, and then we can say s plus equals, we can say a. Now what it will be doing, it will be adding that a to s, right? Now the next thing will be to update this variable a. For this we can say a plus equals 1, right? So we are basically increasing this a. The reason for increasing this a is that this condition becomes false as soon as it reaches this 100. Else, if we haven't done this, what will be happening over here? This a will be constantly at 0 and this loop will fall into an endless loop. The reason is there is no termination condition over here, right? Now we can come down after this while loop, we can simply print and we can say sum equals, and we can say s. Now if we compile this code, we'll be getting the summation of the first 100 terms, right? Similarly, we can increase this number to, let us say, 10,000. Now it will be a very complex task if you have to do it manually, right? Now let us see. See, we were able to get the answer of the first 10,000 terms. So now you can get how much easier while loop is when we are basically using it for much bigger tasks, right? Now the next thing is that we increase this a to n. We can do the reverse of that. We can simply say n, and then we can have this as a greater than, and then we can have this as a, okay? And over here, what we are saying, we will be saying that n is a is our 10,000 terms and n is our 0. So now what we'll be doing, we have to basically decrease this a, okay? So we can say decrease this a by 1 and then we can add that same. So this time what we are doing, we are basically doing the opposite of what we have done earlier. So in the previous example, we were increasing a and we were making sure that a reaches n by incrementing the value 1. So we were summing, in a forward direction. So we are finding the summation in a forward direction, but now we are doing it in a backward direction. So we are starting from 10,000 and we are going till 0. So if we do the compilation of this code, we'll be still getting the same answer. So these are the two approaches of while loop, and then you can go forward or you can come backward. Now we have understood a little bit about while loop, And now let us jump into our very first example, and the example is user input validation. Okay, now to perform user input validation, we'll be requiring a boolean, which we can say as val input. So it will be basically valid input, and we can say it is false. Okay, so initially we are saying that the input which we are providing is basically not a valid input. Okay, now we can simply say while not, we can say val input. What we are trying to say is whenever the input, it is actually not a valid, then we can say user age, and then we can say input enter your age. Now what we are asking from the user, we are basically asking from the user his or her age. Now we know a very simple thing that in this particular generation, the human age will somewhere, it will range between 0 to 120. Okay, so from the historical data, now we can simply say if user age, if user age dot s digit, so it should be digit, right? Then we can say and 0, okay, less than int. Then in this int, we can simply say user age, and then we can simply say is less than equals 120. So what we are doing over here, we are simply saying that the user age, it should be a digit. Okay, so it cannot be a character, it has to be a digit. With this, if the user, let's suppose the user provide a age like 66.5, because the user might be at an age of 66 years with a 6 month, then we will be basically rounding it up to an integer. Okay, now after this, we can simply say if it falls in this particular range, we can say valid, or we can say val input equals true. The reason is that if it falls in this region, then the age is valid. Else, what we can say, we can say that the age is invalid. So we can say something like invalid input. Okay, and then we can ask the user that, please enter a valid age, right? Now, after doing this, what we can do next, we can simply print, after this while loop, and we can simply say something like this. We can say print, and then we can say f string, we will be using f string, and then we can say thank you, your age is, and then we can basically pass the user age. Okay, so what are we doing over here? Let us recall everything. So firstly, we are defining that the input, or we can say the valid age, is false. So we are saying that user haven't inputted the age till now. Then we are basically having this while loop, and it will basically check while whether this particular age is not a valid age. Okay, so if it will be not a valid age, then we will be basically asking the user to enter his age. Then we'll be checking for this condition, which basically states that the age has to be a digit. With this particular age has to range in between this 0 to 120. Okay, so this is the condition. Then we can say valid input equals true. The reason is that if the input falls in this range, that means the age is correct. Else, we can simply ask the user that you have to, re-input the age because you have an invalid input, and due to this while loop will again trigger, as this condition will be still true because we are not updating this val input equals true in the else part. Now, if this true condition satisfy, then we are basically printing this age as soon as this while loop condition becomes false. Now, if we try to compile this code, then it is asking for an age. Let us suppose we say somewhere between 30. It is saying that thank you, your age is 30. But if we try to recompile this code, and let us try to provide an age which is greater than 120. Let us suppose we provided 121, then it is saying invalid input, please enter a valid age. Now we can provide our age again, let us say we say 0, then it is still invalid age, because someone's age cannot be 0, right? Then the next thing will be that you have to provide a age which is correct. Let us suppose we provide an age of 28, and it is saying thank you, your age is 28. So this is a simple technique, or we can say a simple logic, using which you can basically validate your user input. Okay, and this will basically help you in multiple ways, and you can implement this in multiple places. This logic can also be implemented in other programming languages, like where front end and all of that things are involved, which will basically help you to understand the user input and filter it according to your need. Now, in the next example, we'll be looking into a pattern printing example, using which we'll be able to understand how pattern printing can be also achieved using while loop. Okay, so what pattern we are going to print? We'll be printing stars. Now the star formation will depend upon the row. So for the first row there will be 1 star, and for the second row it will be 2, and it will gradually increase as the rows will be increasing. So firstly we'll be requiring a variable, we can say row, and we can initially set the row to 1 as we are focusing on the first row for the first time. Then we can say while, we can say row, and then we can simply say is less than equals. Then you have to input the number of rows you want. For here, and for this example, I'm wanting 5 rows, so I'll be keeping it as 5. Then in this while loop, we can simply say print. Then we'll be having this single character star, and then we can use a multiplication symbol, and then we can say row. Now what this multiplication symbol will do, it will basically multiply this star number of time this row value is. So for the first time the row is 1, so the star will be 1. Now after this we can basically increase the row value by 1. Now for the next iteration, this row will be now 2, hence the number of stars formed will be 2. Okay, now let us try to compile this code, and if we do, we'll be able to get this cool looking pattern. Now we can reverse this star pattern also by simply doing one thing, which will be, if we can increase this row to 5, we can change this lesser than to greater than. Now row will be basically greater than, it should be equals 0, so or we can say 1. So row has to be greater than equals 1, and then we can gradually decrease this row by 1. And now if we'll recompile this code, we're getting this reverse pattern, where in the first row we are getting 5 as the row value is 5. For the next iteration, the row value will decrease to 4, as it will be decrementing by 1. So we are getting this 4 stars, and hence the 3, 2 and 1. And finally for the 0th, it will get terminated, as the condition is simple, that row has to be greater than or equivalent to 1. So the termination will occur as soon as row reaches 0. Okay, so this was it for this example. In the next example, we'll be basically printing the Fibonacci series, and we'll be looking how we can achieve that particular thing using just 4 lines. Okay, so before deep diving into the Fibonacci series, let us understand how Fibonacci series are calculated. So initially we have 2 terms, 0 and 1. Now these 2 terms are basically the first and the second term. Now for calculating the third term, we basically add the previous 2 terms. So after adding the previous 2 terms, which are 0 and 1, we'll be getting 1 again. Now for the fourth term, we'll be basically adding its previous 2 term, which will be the second and the third term, which are 1 and 1. So we'll be getting 2. Now for the fifth term, it will be the summation of the fourth and the third term. Hence it will be 5 followed by 8. And then it will be similarly, going on as we increase with the series. Okay, now let us understand how this series is basically being calculated. Okay, for this we can have a variable a, and we can say a is 0, and then we can have b, which is basically 1. Now we can simply say for the first a, we will be basically printing a, which is basically 0, right? So we can say 0, and from the next iteration, what we can say, a will be now b, hence the a value will become 1, right? For the next thing, we will be basically
incrementing the value of b by saying that b is now basically a plus b. Hence, the value of b becomes 1. The reason is a was 0 and b was 1. So we'll be getting this 1. So this is our first iteration. Okay. So we can simply say iteration 1. Okay. Now for the next iteration, the a value will be printed, which is basically 1. Okay. For the first time, it was basically 0. So we can say 0 was printed. Now this is basically iteration 2. Okay. Now the next thing which we'll be doing is that we're basically replacing the value of a with b. Hence a will become 2, as b was 2 over here. So it was this a plus b, which was basically, sorry, so it will be becoming 1, right? Because we were having this a, okay, this b as 1. So we are now having this a as 1. And the next thing will be this b. Now b will be basically a plus b, which will basically result in 2, as the value of a is 1 and the value of b previously calculated was 1, right? Hence, in the third iteration, which will be basically iteration 3, will be getting the value of a as 1 again. Now the next time a will be now replaced with b, hence it will be now 2, and b will basically be a plus b, which will result in so it was 1 plus this 2, it will be 3, right? Now if we basically go for iteration 4, the value which will be printed will be basically 2, right? So if you look into this series, now you'll be getting this, we are getting this 1, then 1, then 1, then 2, and if we keep on looping, we'll be getting the next value. Okay, so now let us code this simple thing. So how can we code this? So we can simply say that we'll be having a and b as our variable. Let us initialize a with 0 and b with 1. Okay, so we can simply achieve this thing using this. And now the next thing will be that we can have a while loop, and then we can say, let us suppose we want to print the series till a reaches 100. So we can say till a is lesser than 100, right? And then we can simply do the same thing. We can say print a. Okay, now we can override the end, and we can say we want just a comma and a space. Okay, so we'll be requiring one more thing over here, which will be basically that we want this to be together, okay, and this to be together, right? Now the next thing which we have to do, we have to basically specify that we want a and b as overwritten, and we'll be saying that a is now b and b is now a plus b. Okay, and it is done. Now if we compile this code, we'll be getting this series, which is 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, and followed by 89. Now you can see this complex series, which will be requiring a lot of calculation. If we do it manually, it can be just achieved using this 4 lines, using while loop. And we were doing the same thing. For the first time, we initialized the value of a and b as 0 and 1. So we did that. And then for each iteration, what we were doing, we were basically, initializing that a will be now b. So a is now b, and b is basically a plus b. So b is basically a plus b, right? So using this, for the first time, we'll be basically printing a, which is 0. Now the a will basically, having b, which is 1. So for the next time, it will be printing 1, and the b will be overwritten to 1 again, because we were having this 0 plus 1 as 1. Okay, so this is how you basically achieve the Fibonacci series. In the next example, we'll be looking how we can calculate factorial of a number, and after that, we'll be basically having a good understanding about while loop, and we can move into our next topic, which will be do while, in our upcoming video.
Okay, so in this particular example, we'll be understanding how to calculate factorial of a number. Before calculating factorial, let us understand how factorial are basically being calculated. Let us suppose the number 5. Now the factorial of 5 will be 5 multiplied with 4 multiplied with 3 multiplied with 2, then multiplied with 1. So this is, how basically the factorial is calculated. So the answer will be 5 4s are 20, 23 60, 120. So this will be basically factorial of 5. Similarly, we will be calculating factorial of any number. So for this, the first thing will be to have a number. For that, let us consider a number 5. Okay, now we can say factorial equals 1. So initially the factorial will be 1. Now we can say while num is greater than 1, then we can simply say factorial multiplied equals num. Okay, now what we can do, we can simply say num minus equals 1, and then finally after this while we can print the factorial. So we can say print, and then we can use the f string, and then we can simply say the factorial is, and we can simply have this factorial. Okay, so what are we doing over here? We are basically saying that this number, which is 5, has to be greater than 1. Now for the first time it will be 5 multiplied by 1, and the factorial will become 5. Now the next time this number will be decrementing, and then this will be rechecked. Now the number is 4, which is greater than 1, hence it is true. Now the next time what it will be doing, the value of factorial was 5, so 5 multiplied by 4, which will be basically 20. Then we will be having 3, which will basically be 60, and then 20, and then 1. At 1 it will basically get it will basically, this while loop will get triggered, exit, and after this we'll be getting this print statement, and here we'll be basically printing the value of the factorial, which will be 120. Now if we compile this code, so we are getting the value as 120. So this is how you can basically achieve factorial of any number. Now this is it for this video. So we have covered while loop entirely. We have also seen few of the examples, and in the next video we'll be covering do while and the for loop after that. Till then, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming updates. And this is Coding Hub signing off for this video.